All right, everyone. So we're going to have to explain DeFi in about 40 minutes up here. Should be totally easy. I'm not worried about it at all. But I do want to get into it. So if we could just kick things off with a super quick round of intros, who you are and what you do.
Hi, my name's Angus Fletcher. I work for Finality International, where we're setting up a series of peer-to-peer payment systems on a global basis with settlement in an asset that effectively has the characteristics of fiat currency. What's the purpose? The purpose really is twofold. One is to provide a universal set of payment rails for the settlement of digital assets. And secondly, the other side is to provide more efficient liquidity management on a cross-currency basis.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ioana Sârpățeanu. I'm Chief Strategy Officer at DEA, which stands for Decentralized Information Asset and is an open source Oracle platform and financial information platform. In basic terms, an Oracle provides the link between off-chain and on-chain data, so smart contracts are confined to only automatically access the data of the network they operate on. So they need off-chain. Oh, so then they need.
Yeah, it's working.
Yeah, but I think you can hear me, right? Can you all hear me?
It's probably maybe a recording, and maybe that's what I'm worried about.
I'll shout. So an Oracle creates the link between on-chain and off-chain environments. And like I said, smart contracts are confined to only accessing data. So what do you want me to do? Okay. It's on. It's on? Okay. Okay, now it's better. Again, third time. An Oracle is the link between on-chain and off-chain data. And it is very relevant because it serves as a bridge for a variety of off-chain data. Mostly for DeFi, it is relevant in terms of asset pricing, and this is the main use case for Oracle in DeFis. But as the ecosystem develops, and we'll touch upon that later, we will need a variety of new data sets. This is why there are a couple of Oracle providers in the market. We're not the only ones, but where we differentiate ourselves is via the community involvement angle. So we involve the community in sourcing, testing methodologies, and pushing them to get actively involved in the running of DEA. And we also differ in the sense that we've targeted many L2s and we've integrated with many L2 chains, which we believe are going to be the next blue chips of tomorrow. But I'll expand on that later. I also run DEA Labs, which is a unit within DEA, and there I cover a variety of other angles, mostly around reg and policymaking interaction and incumbent partnerships, women empowerment, women in emerging tech empowerment, and Oracle experimentation beyond financial data permutations, so into gaming, NFTs, digital fashion, etc. Over to you.
Thank you. My mic's working. And well done for navigating
women have to face difficulties always, right?
But
we face them with our heads up. So
and leapfrog them. Well done. It's always off-putting for that to happen. First of all, it's great to be back at another DAS London. It's my second one, even though it's kind of the third year, given everything that's been going on. And great sunny day in London, and love what they've done with the venue. My name is Richard Muirhead. I'm the managing partner at Fabric Ventures. And I guess, I don't know exactly who's in the audience, but I have a feeling I come at this from a slightly different angle. I kind of cut my teeth coming straight out of university, having sort of studied some engineering in building software companies and in selling to really big telecoms outfits and big enterprises. And the thing that struck me way back 20 years ago was that we were constrained by the software we're using in terms of the speed at which we could build new products. And so the vision at that point in time was that we could have software platforms that would not constrain, our imagination in terms of what we can build out there, and not constrain what we can use software to achieve together. And a really vital part of that was embedding the ability to deal with value into the software stack, so that software could make and keep financial promises. And so effectively, that is what DeFi delivers within the software stack, and then you can put it, it's an open source software stack, and you open source networks, and you can put it in the hands of people right around the world, and it is indeed just up to their imagination as to what they can possibly achieve, not just on their own, but particularly once you have those incentive structures tied into those networks, but what everyone can achieve together, because people can have some ownership, something at stake, some rewards. So I come at this from the perspective of someone who built software companies, and then the last 10 years has been building a Fabric as an investor in the space, and we would call our thesis as being centered around Web3, or the dawn of the open web, rather than versus closed meta constructs, for example, and then in particular how that leads to an open economy. And in a sense, we think of the future as being one where DeFi disappears altogether. It's kind of a situation of zero-fi. It just becomes embedded in all of your productive activity, and you get access to the financing you need at that point of interaction with the software systems.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Richard, you were just kind of getting into it there, but I think with something like DeFi, you almost can't go too high level because it's so new and complicated. Show of hands in the audience, how many folks think they understand what DeFi is, why it matters? All right, that's pretty good, actually. But let's still do a primer. So I'm going to ask you to do a very hard thing, which is, in a short, succinct way, what is DeFi? Why should we care about it?
I'll start. My mic seems to not be working again, but it's okay. I'll start anyway. So again, let's put it in simple terms. I see DeFi as the democratization of access for users and creators of financial instruments, and the neutralization of complexities and inefficiencies of the traditional financial systems mostly via replacing intermediaries with code. I think that covers it from my perspective. It's very high level, and we can dive deeper into it. And I want to stress that the angle that I like most in this equation is the fact that it opens up access for creators of financial instruments. This doesn't happen in TradFi. There are huge barriers to entry, and then the ability for someone, I don't know, in an emerging economy to just download software and create a financial instrument and then spread it across the globe via blockchains, I think it's a very powerful thing. And I think that's why this is going to evolve into something that we are not yet capable of foreseeing in its fullest implementation.
I can attempt to sort of build on that. Often when people talk about DeFi, they focus on the fact that you take out the intermediary and you're taking out the cost that's involved. And for sure, I think there should be, because this is all open, permissionless, i.e., you ask forgiveness rather than permission for getting involved as a supplier of liquidity or a user or whatever in these platforms, or a developer building on top of it. That transparency and the data-driven nature of it is going to lead to a reduction in costs, because you can see what the margins are. Maybe we'll come back to it later. I think it's actually going to lead to the whole regulatory side of things becoming less an Achilles heel of this space, but rather one of its very greatest strengths. But most critically for us, then, again, trying to think from the perspective of someone who's backing founders who are trying to build new software products, is that you have this environment where, as just stated, you can go and pluck the use of a stable coin, the use of a primitive, a money Lego to do interest rate swaps. We're into kind of DeFi 2.0 now, and we're looking at sort of protocols that allow you to be insulated from the fees and impermanent loss from providing liquidity, and just optimize the deployment of your capital across different liquidity pools to optimize yield in different ways. So the innovation is taking place at the money Lego level, and anyone can come along and grab that and construct a more complicated application and then embed it within some business application. It's that pace of innovation, the way it's open for creators, that is truly the most powerful thing about this. Of course, as long as we can get our heads around not a small shift in the approach to regulation, but rethinking regulation with these new tools in an entirely different way, because it's really not just turned upside down, it's kind of put in the Moulinex and kind of reconstructed.
Yeah, and I think to build on both of those, the access point is hugely important, and the provision of new products in this space is absolutely critical. So how do you create liquidity in a product through tokenization? You can basically create liquidity in pretty much illiquid assets today, whether that be the likes of art, commodities, or real estate, for example. And by being able to utilize this technology in order to be able to do that, that's crucially important. And I totally agree with the view of, that you can take out the intermediaries as a result of that. And certainly, again, if I'm coming from an institutional viewpoint on that, that brings enormous opportunities in a world where today everything is very centralized and limited access to traditional marketplaces. And that, that means that there are all of those intermediaries that bring around cost associated with every transaction done, that brings around risk because there is significant counterparty risk for any actor that then wants access to traditional markets.
Right.
And being able to remove that through peer-to-peer networks is going to be crucially important.
Absolutely. So to just sum up what everyone's saying, I think there are a couple really key ideas here. One, there's an elimination of cost, right? These are open source networks that almost look like if-then statements a lot of times. So to use an example like Compound or Aave or something like that, there's no person in the middle that's underwriting risk. It's if you have these assets, then you get access to this, use this as collateral, then you get access to this in terms of loan. So there's a certain elimination of cost. But I think one of the other things I'm getting from listening to you, and this is a metaphor that's actually helped me as well, understand is the speed of innovation and who this is open to. So if you wanted to create a financial product before, let's say your path to kind of do that was you'd work at a big bank, like a Goldman Sachs or something, maybe you'd work there for 20 years, you'd become a managing director, then you'd wrap this kind of product and you'd sell it to institutions, and that was your journey. But now there are literally examples of 19-year-olds or younger, kids that are writing software, it's locking up billions of dollars in assets, and these things happen like that.
Can I build on that a little bit? And it helps me at least begin to think about the direction this can go, to use an example of something that's really exploded recently. Who here is familiar with a company called Sky Mavis and a game called Axie Infinity? So like 10% or something of the people, yeah. It's a game where you can breed and battle these little sort of slightly Tamagotchi type characters called Axies. But it costs in order to acquire those Axies originally, hundreds rather than thousands necessarily. And there's a complex system of now 3 different tokens within that gaming environment in the metaverse, the true metaverse, that people enter into. And therefore, in order to fund their entry into that environment, people have set up DAOs, actually, so communities that can codify rules for whereby you can borrow the asset you require in order to get entry, like Axie, and within those DAOs there's guilds that manage different types of players or scholars as they call them, and then once you do that, if you're successful in playing, you can earn money. Now, the interesting thing for me is that it sounds like a game and is a game, but could be applied to any kind of fairly knowledge-based activity with sort of data labeling for AI, or maybe it's something more sophisticated, fraud detection. There could be a lot of things it could be applied to, but also the way it's something that it's come in under the radar, and now the wallet that is used to store that value is being used in a mainstream way across the Philippines, where the game is most popular. So you can see a situation where someone's identity now exists in the DeFi ecosystem by way of this game, and someone has value that they can use to buy things in real life, heaven forbid, on a daily basis. But I think that's the way in which kind of this wave of disruption is going to kind of roll out. And that's an example of an application that people have built that's grown at parabolic rates, and there's got a multi-billion-dollar valuation now just in basically a few months. But I think that's just the beginning, obviously not the end.
Yeah, I also want to add on something that you said, going back to the trajectory of what was it, a Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan product person. Even, he had to go or she had to go through all of those layers, but at the end, the product would have been filtered via regulatory restrictions or, let's just say, creativity wouldn't have been put too much at work into creating this product. So this is what tokens have tried to achieve, right? If you look at DeFi and what's being constructed there, there's a new way of financial instruments and products. But there's also a limitation there. Why? Because it is still associated with finance. And this is where NFTs have kicked in as well. They created an additional creativity layer in terms of what types of instruments, they don't need to be financial, you can create by pulling together all of these resources and primitives that you now have via this variety of new technologies. So even if you were part of the TradFi system and you managed to come up with a product, it still would have been very much constrained by potentially obsolete regulatory requirements. So.
And I think, again, back to from the institutional side, there is this highly regulated world of financial instruments on the one side, and then there's these new sets of products that are emerging on the other side. We've talked, I think, over the past day or so around, the rates of returns that you can get in this space. Institutional investors clearly want to get into that. They're in the traditional space. They just don't get those rates of returns. I think the challenge is, where that balance is going to lie and how those new products are actually going to end up being regulated. So are they going to become or be deemed by regulators as financial instruments and then pulled in that way? I think for the time being that space is being allowed to grow. And as I say, I think you then see from institutional investors and institutions that support them that they're really looking at how do they provide service offerings in that space. So if you take custody as an example, the traditional view of custody is holding an asset. Now it's how do you manage private keys onto a specific chain, for example. I think the other side of this comes back to that efficiency side. So when we look at what Finality is going to bring in by having the ability to have interoperable peer-to-peer payment systems, and I'll come on when we talk about potential hurdles, but payment systems that can interoperate across border on a real-time 24/7 basis. We've done modeling with a number of our shareholders and future participants. And they're looking at, by the ability to be able to manage liquidity on a near real-time basis, to really create between 30 to 70% of liquidity savings. I mean, that's huge for a financial institution to be able to do that. So, I think there is both the new world and there's the existing world that this technology and this approach can really bring to benefits for.
Absolutely.
I'll build on the regulatory side a little bit. So for our sins, sort of struck out to try and bridge some of the gap between this emerging world and the regulatory side. And have gone, actually, first of all, we sought the backing of the European Investment Fund, part of the European Investment Bank, which is European Commission, largely European Commission, money. And so we're regulated within the UK under the FCA and also registered with the CSSF and going up with both of the jurisdictions, growing up in terms of our scope and size and so forth. And I'll just say that, well, first of all, I think it's great the EIF is sort of backing this new space, to your point, Angus, is encouraging the innovation to take place. And for example, one of our portfolio companies is Angle, which is now actually the biggest by sort of value locked euro-denominated stablecoin out there, with an innovative tri-actor model for maintaining the stability of that synthetic asset. So I encourage you all to look at it. So I think that's great. But my personal experience of trying to get regulation in place, compliance in place, and do this now, mainly around ARC. We have a $150 million venture fund, but the fund, I should say that, I say 125 million euro venture fund, and now looking at some other pockets with a slightly different sort of construct, is that it's a nightmare talking to lawyers, accountants, regulators in different jurisdictions, because essentially there is no truth out there about what the situation is, and then it changes over time. And what all that causes is a kind of a race to the kind of lowest common denominator, and the greatest level of fear for any service providers as to what the impact of that regulation is. It becomes an entirely non-logical or rational or deterministic thing, and an entirely almost like emotional thing. And it's monumentally, I think my mic, monumentally, thank you, very kind. It's monumentally dysfunctional. And I think that inhibits, I mean, again, obviously puts the brakes on innovation and getting stuff done. And I dread to think of how much time I've spent on that and will continue to spend probably. But it also importantly, and I think this is crucial, it means that everybody's inhibited, all the service providers in particular, inhibited from including different investors in the product, because as soon as there's something slightly funky about where they're coming from, everybody's like, oh, we're not even going to be bothered to do the work. Yeah.
So,
yeah, just in addition, the European Investment Bank, member states are the shareholders, so I have to congratulate you that you managed to get the EIF to support you, because for that body to reach any type of consensus, especially on backing any infrastructure projects that is outside of traditional realm, be it finance or whatever else, yeah, good job. And this is the way to go for it, I think, because the regulatory interaction can be very complex. You need to figure out what to base the discussion on. I've often said it, I come from a political background, I know how the system works. I've often said that going into the regulators with a very granular topic or talking about the definition of an asset, whether it's hybrid or a security utility token, they relate to it for 5 minutes and then they just think, okay, this is something that we need to shut down because we cannot really comprehend what it enables. So this is actually a great way to involve the policymakers and regulators, get them to fund the new infrastructure, right? The DeFi infrastructure, and then they are materially invested in it, so they have no choice but to support it.
yeah.
Totally. I guess, but they did it, I believe, because there's one thing that they'll wake up to. Well, maybe top of the totem pole is like, do I get elected? But somewhere near the top of the totem pole is kind of geopolitical security. Sure. And so their view is that this move towards blockchain and its interactions with AI is up there in frankly, the kind of jostling between Europe and the US and China. And so the imperative came down from, or the instruction came down from the European Commission to invest in this space. So I think that's how it kind of snuck in. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I come from traditional finance world before moving into the fintech world, and my core focus since 2008 has been all on the regulatory side. I think where we are is really interesting when you compare it back to 2008, and I'll come on to that in a second, is very, very similar in many ways, in that each of the governments across the world are all trying to encourage innovation in this space. They can see the explosion of it, and they want it to happen. And actually, they want to understand how this works, and they can see that that it brings huge benefits to the market. At the same time, they are absolutely petrified they're going to end up in the same position prior to the derivatives explosion, whereby they've let this run and they end up with a situation of financial stability risk, consumers unprotected, and no one to pin the blame on or the accountability if and when things go wrong. And I think a prime example of that is, if you look at the stablecoin world, you can see the winds of change are moving towards saying, yeah, look, we understand the benefit of stablecoin, how it can help in terms of the cash settlement of digital assets. But what we are absolutely want to ensure is that any risk associated with that is understood, managed, and people are accountable, there are bodies accountable. And the problem with distribution is that that becomes more difficult, and is particularly in a permissionless environment. One of the reasons why Finality has gone down the route of, we want the highest level of regulatory backing, i.e. we are going for payment system regulation. So we sit under the auspices of existing regulatory world for that, but with the bringing the benefits of the decentralized, distributed setup to it. And I think we're going to see, we're going to see the regulators move more and more in that direction. And you can either go down the route of, right, let's set up, let's go, and then we end up with regulators potentially coming down on us and restricting, or go to the route that we're going, and we'll see how that I think it's going to play out. But the key thing is education. Regulators want to learn. They have consultations all the time. They want to understand how this is going to work. They want input from the industry to help them understand and to help build that regulation on a principle basis rather than prescriptive basis. But it's up to us as the industry to really help them drive that so it isn't.
They should try YouTube.
Restrictive.
Go and check out some videos.
Sorry?
They should try YouTube. Go and check out some videos.
Yeah. But
Yeah, I wanted to add something, but I mean, we're going to turn it up into a regulatory discussion.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
this is what we want.
Yeah, we have to be careful.
I want to actually end the panel looking forward onto something. So if one framework that you have for looking at crypto and everything that we're doing is to continue this trend of making everything digital, right? Over the course of the last 20 years, the most valuable companies that have been built are network-based companies in some way. And I think an appropriate way of looking at what's going on is that this is just a continuation of people living their life more and more in a digital realm. Analog is imperfect, but you can kind of look at Bitcoin and say, okay, this is money in this new realm, or this is something that looks like gold or a store of value. DeFi is something that looks like a new financial system, right, in this realm, where it's the base infrastructure, architecture of that financial system. There's a term that's getting thrown around a lot right now, the metaverse, which is kind of what I feel like I'm describing right now, but NFTs, non-fungible tokens, are a big part of that. Gaming is a big part of that. Richard, you mentioned Axie Infinity, which is a crazy phenomenon for those of you who aren't familiar with it. It's nuts that it exists. But talk a little bit about some of these trends that you're seeing in this space, like looking forward into the future. What are some areas that you're excited about, that you're paying particular attention to, where you see opportunity developing?
Do you want me to start?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about DeFi, but what we didn't mention was the fact that this first cohort of DeFi projects was built mostly via emulating existing processes and products and financial instruments from the TradFi industry. And I think we're moving beyond that. So we're moving towards a next-gen decentralized finance ecosystem. We might call it DeFi 2.0 or 3.0, or we don't need to call it anything. It's just a next-generational thing, where we see a difference in the sense that it is less about acquiring users and more about generating composability between the projects and the protocols that have already been built in this first phase of DeFi. This is extremely relevant for us as an Oracle provider, and as I've said in my 3 attempts of introducing myself, we are betting on L2, so layer 2 protocols and chains, and what is being built around those, the composability and programmability around those, and also the composability and programmability around decentralized autonomous organizations, which in most cases run these new protocols. So yeah, this is where we see the ecosystem going. We are integrated with most L2 chains. So for us, it is all about cementing our position as the Oracle provider for DeFi, let's call it DeFi 2.0 or next gen of DeFi. Another thing that I'm seeing, and Mike has referenced it, is the metaverse. There are various definitions of the metaverse depending on who provides that definition, and I guess depending on the business interest of the person or the project or the protocol that sticks to a particular type of definition. I see it as a user-centric, gamified virtual space orchestrated by tokens and powered by, let me think, distributed coordination mechanism systems, which I look at, or we look at DIA in the form of DAOs. So DAO as a new type of a company fully community-driven, enables a coordination mechanism for the next generation of DeFi projects. So this would be an additional trend. I'm sure you're all familiar, because we're all talking about the metaverse as if it has just emerged now. I'm sure you're all familiar with Second Life, which was a virtual world escapism kind of environment in the early 2000s, and it didn't succeed. Why didn't it succeed? Because you didn't have the primitives that you have currently via Web3 or decentralized technologies that enable revenue and value to be generated and coordinated in a distributed fashion in a virtual world. So that didn't exist then, which is why Second Life failed. Now it's being revived again. The idea is that with the metaverse, you now have all of these primitives, coordination mechanisms, game mechanics, Web3 technologies that would allow this ecosystem to grow even further. And now I'm going to another trend. I don't know if it's a trend, it's a means of enabling all the other trends that I've just referenced. NFTs. Why are NFTs important? I don't know how many of you know what NFTs are, more or less? Well done.
How many own an NFT?
Great. What NFT do you own? Just kidding. Yeah. So NFTs are a non-fungible token. Why are they relevant for the angles and points I just made? Because they represent ownership of a digital object in this new form of the internet. So if we think of the metaverse as a materialization or a very tangible implementation of Web3 technology, NFTs allow you to own digital objects or to have ownership of internet created value. This wasn't possible in Web 2.0 environments because platforms own everything. You just rent it off of them when you deploy their platform or specific products. So here we are in a situation where we can create an open economic system, incentivize everyone to generate value in a virtually Web3 enabled virtual open economic system. We also focus a lot at DIA on the NFT DeFi symbiosis and how you can use NFTs, which are by default non-fungible, as we just said, but you can use them for a variety of DeFi use cases via fractionalizing them or wrapping them in ERC20, thus making them fungible, etc. So the first step is the intersection of NFTs and DeFi for us, and then potentially creating interoperability between an open economic system within the metaverse. I hope that makes it clear.
Fantastic overview. But maybe I'll try and go into territory that I'm kind of the least well equipped to talk about, and then sort of navigate back again. But I think it is interesting, given the topic of the talk is like the investment case for DeFi, to step back and look at the fact that, you know, over the last 20 years, the Fed has brought up debt to the tune of, 10 trillion now. The fact that in the last 10 years, the interest rates across all of the kind of major economies have joined that of Japan and being extremely low, and that may be a reflection on the kind of fiscal and monetary policy and the, perhaps economic progress being made, but probably the former, and that of course that hard assets, in particular Bitcoin, have done particularly well versus other assets where quantitative easing is possible. And I think that's the fundament for saying, okay, well, if we can have assets that can be taken out of the control of central banks and connected, I believe, not just directly to knowledge work and digital activities, but frankly by way of the software platforms from all types of productive assets and productive activity. And we were just talking about NFTs then as something that can be ascribed to non-fungible assets out there, then we are in the midst of designing a fundamentally improved economic system in terms of managing the money side of things, and fundamentally better in terms of the way we organize ourselves to achieve things. Capitalism is only kind of like 500 years old, whatever. I think this guy Luca Pacioli back in late 1400s or whatever, who came up with the first book on the firm and double entry bookkeeping. We've had experiments at one end with communism and cowboy capitalism at the other. It's all new and up for grabs in terms of reinvention. And with the new technology at our fingertips, we can actually rethink stuff and become community first in our thinking, become DAO, or decentralized autonomous organization first in our thinking, have something that is incorruptible, that manages the allocation of assets and the decision-making about regulation, and provides a much more level playing field, on a global basis for folks to build new applications and do, funky stuff. And let's give a quick example. We've got one investment we're looking at right now that is looking to optimize the creation of economies, mostly in the media space. We call it an open media play. And looking at the way in which you can create assets out of even people's likes on a tweet. It might not be a tweet, I might be breaking copyright there, but in the kind of open metaverse. And we've got another company who's already got the deal to create NFTs on their platform. This is immutable with TikTok. So every moment, every instant of activity in the metaverse becomes something that can be, importantly, not just user-generated, as in Web 2, but as in Web 3, it's user-owned. You own your identity. You own the outcome of your productive activity. And so I think if you think about what we can do, if we can harness the coordination power of those networks when people can own their activity, and think that actually we can have openness and transparency and the data available. Facebook hacked the system. In the open, we can have the openness and transparency to drive. I think I'm more worried about Facebook than the FCA, but actually I had that experience just yesterday with mentioning a show at the Tate on one platform, and then it appeared as an advert in another, Hogarth at the Tate anyway. We can really make, solve the compliance problem, and rather than kind of like we've got better cars, let's protect, Granny by not allowing Granny to use cars anymore or something, but just rethinking, the whole approach. Or maybe we've got teleporting, so let's just, regulate teleporters until nobody can use them.
Yeah, just one thing, I agree and second everything you've just said. On the digital identity side, we don't own it yet, right? That's the whole problem. There's no sustainable decentralized reputation system in existence, and there's no system that would allow you to use a variety of your digital identities on chain currently. Many solutions are being thought of and created, but this is one of the infrastructural areas that need to evolve.
It's definitely not
very
solved.
swiftly.
Totally
Exactly.
agree. Yeah, totally agree. Ethereum wallet's not bad start there, but yeah.
Unfortunately, we're running low on time here. Angus, do you want to close us out with some thoughts here?
Yeah, so I think from an institutional point of view, we're going to see a new suite of digital asset products that institutions are going to be able to invest in. I think you're still going to have the old market world as well, and I think those that are going to be most successful at an institutional level are going to be those that can basically navigate between the two. That's going to be for the foreseeable future. I think that's going to exist. The use of the technology that digital ledger technology is already starting to revolutionize the way institutions operate. It is able to take out a whole host of the reconciliations that currently exist. It allows greater access. So I think, how that technology gets fully integrated is going to be key, and how you manage the two worlds is going to be is those that can do that successfully and adapt to that are going to be those that win out in this space.
Absolutely. All right, guys, thank you so much for an amazing panel. Everyone give them a round of
Thank you.
applause.
Thank you.